Well, we're doing a little interview with Radio Jamaica, which is a wonderful radio station. They have a great public affairs program. And I'm going to try to capture my end of the conversation. We can't capture theirs, but this is about the British election. You know, the British election this year is astonishing because there's basically a hung parliament, as they call it. There's no majority. The Labour Party did not get a majority. The Conservatives did not get a majority, and the opposition Liberal Democrats didn't get a majority either. So the question now is, how is Parliament going to be organized? Because in Britain you have a government depending on who has the majority in Parliament. It's not like the US. They don't have presidential elections. Even though we pretended that they were electing a prime minister, they really weren't. They were actually electing members of Parliament. They had the debates, between the three major party leaders, but that is not how they elect a government. So now the question is, how is a coalition going to be formed? Because none of them have sufficient number of seats to create a government and therefore select a prime minister from the majority. And so this is complicated, and as you'll hear, it has implications for the US. There are economic implications. The European economies are kind of teeter-tottering around, and so it's more important than we think. British elections are not usually that interesting in the United States, but this one should be. Well, I think this is a mathematical problem more than a political problem, because, how do you get 326 seats to have the majority to be able to form a government out of this really hideous mishmash that the voters of Great Britain, have imposed on their country? I guess there's another possibility, although it's very remote, and that is Britain has had what are sort of called grand coalitions. There was one in 1915, Liberal and Conservative coalition, dealing with World War I crisis. 1931, a coalition that basically was put together to deal with the Great Depression, and then of course, Churchill's 1940 World War II coalition. And Britain is, on the one hand, having a political crisis, but there is lurking a very serious economic crisis with the pound sterling descending, with the European economic crisis having a tremendous vortex effect on the British economy, the FTSE, the stock market, housing prices, the budget deficit. It may be that Britain in 2010 is at a moment of crisis that is big enough that the Conservatives and the Tory and the Labour Party may have to say, we need to lock hands and get together and get over this crisis, because otherwise we are adding to the instability. Well, I mean, if I'm Nick Clegg, my question is, am I going to get on board the zombie train of Gordon Brown? And the answer is clearly no. I mean, this is a losing proposition. It is not at all a positive for the Liberal Democrats to become part of a coalition government of a party that has been rejected by the British voters, that has failed to address some of the critical issues of budget deficits and other things that are plaguing the public. And, I guess if I am basically sitting there saying, what should I do? I'm going to count my minutes and say what is down the road. Now, we have to remember that in 1974, which was the last time we had a hung parliament, what actually happened was the government continued as a minority government. It plogged through. It went until October of 1974, and then they had a new election. And I think that's a real possibility. I mean, I think that it's very possible, perhaps even likely, that Gordon Brown is going to just hang in there, stretch it out, really not be able to cut any deals with anyone, and have another round coming up, and I think October is the most likely time for that. So, the question that I would have if I'm the Liberal Democrats and Nick Clegg is it better to say, I almost got on the Titanic, or is it better to have it said that Nick Clegg, God rest his soul, was on the Titanic? And I think I know what the answer is. Well, we have to remember that Great Britain has 367 parties. Now, most of them don't make much of a difference, and the people against bureaucracy and Mum's Army and so on are not major parties. But there is this sort of citizen rebellion against two parties, and there are more parties in Great Britain than there are in the United States or perhaps any other country in the world, and it shows that the two parties that dominate British politics to some extent really are parties that need a complete rejuvenation, that need to re-examine who they are and reposition themselves. And this election, has presented a real crisis, and maybe it will be healthy for the British political system to have to grapple with this, because this is 2000 in the United States. Remember, when we had gridlock, we had no president, we had no majority. That's what this is, and so that always is like a bucket of ice cold water poured on you to say, let's figure out how to improve the system. Well, that's right. You have the Scottish National and Sinn Féin and all kinds of other smaller parties that we don't know about generally, and I don't know which. I haven't seen the final results. The Democratic Unionists and so on. But there are these little tiny seats that you could accumulate, but none of them amount to enough to form a government.